The first one that everybody goes to is the podcast itself. What is their focus? What kind of listeners do they have? How many episodes do they have? How many ratings and reviews? One of the sad things about podcasts is most podcasts that die within the first 10 episodes. So it does you no good to be on, episode 7 when they stop paying the hosting bill at episode 8. No one will ever hear you.
Hey, welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, the first global community connecting top-tier independent management consultants with one another. We just heard from today's guest, Tom Schwab, who runs Interview Valet, a firm that helps its clients get booked on targeted podcasts where they can speak directly to their ideal customers. In this episode, Tom shares his perspective on why being a guest on a podcast is a great way to raise your visibility, how to prepare for an interview, how to promote said interview, how to work with a podcast interview booking firm like his, and how to get invited on shows if you want to do it yourself. You can learn more about Interview Valet on their website, interviewvalet.com. And if you want to connect with Tom, his LinkedIn URL is in the show notes. Final note before the episode proper, I'd like to welcome listeners Mark G., Dwayne C., Kirsty A., and Christopher K., who have recently signed up for the weekly Unleashed email. If you'd like to receive the transcript of each episode, plus other bonus features right in your inbox, email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. Hello, Tom. Welcome to the show.
Will, I am thrilled to be here.
Well, that is awesome that you're thrilled to be here, Tom, because you've done 1,200 podcasts as guest, and this is number 1,201 plus or minus. So it's pretty awesome that you're still enthusiastic about it. Let's dive into this. Give me kind of the quick overview of Interview Valet and how your firm has arranged over 12,000 podcast appearances for your clients.
Yeah, and really, it comes back to the problem that we solve. So we work with authors, speakers, coaches, consultants, brands. Today, I think the biggest problem we all have is obscurity, right? With the product or service that you have right now, there's thousands of people, millions of people that you could help. Biggest problem is they don't know you exist. And this idea of breaking through the noise is probably laughable. We're all adding to the noise. So my view is the best place to go is to get on those areas where your ideal customers are already listening. Get in on the conversation. And that's what we do as a team. So we help people get on the right podcast so that they can tell their story to their ideal customers, get that know, like, and trust, and then work with people to move them from having them move from being a passive listener to an active visitor and ultimately an engaged lead. Some people say, well, do you help people get on podcasts? I'm like, well, that's part of it. Mm-hmm. But if you want better answers, you got to ask better questions. Really, the question is how can I get on podcasts that will grow my business? And that's what we help people do.
Yeah. And, I just have anecdotal evidence of that. A few guests that have been on this show have come back to me. I've seen them face to face or just caught up with them. And they said, oh yeah, I guess, I had a couple people after the show follow up with me and reach out about what we talked about and then ended up turning into projects. So that's always really gratifying. Tell me, I want to walk through this process, but first give us a sense of who your clients are, the types of, how would you segment your customers of the people who want to get on shows?
Right. So there's really 3 verticals that we focus on, and it's not necessarily where we are, but where our clients' clients are. And so that's business, faith and Christianity, and health, nutrition, and wellness. Of those, 80% of them are in that business vertical. But what makes the difference between one of our clients and somebody that maybe wouldn't be is really our clients focus on relationship sales. They're focused on the lifetime value. It's not so much just a one-off transaction, right? If I'm buying a doorstop, a widget, something like that, I don't have to know who the owner of the company is. I don't need to know why they started it, what their vision is. It's a transaction. We work with people that really are building relationships, long-term customer value, And one of the things I see today is that, it's never been easier to sell something online. All you have to do is be a penny cheaper, but it's never been harder to build a relationship. So, like, for example, we've got lawyers that work with us that are trying to help or find ideal clients, and they can serve them throughout the nation. We've got professionals like accountants, consultants. That's one. We work with a lot of virtual book tours, authors that really want to get their book out there, and we'll help them just get a blitz. Other ones are software as a service companies or brands that really want to get out there and introduce to the ideal audience what they're offering. So we've got some companies that are small that you probably never heard of, and we've got some bigger ones like HubSpot and Lockheed Martin that everybody seems to have heard of, but still they need to get their message out there to their ideal customers.
Wow. Okay. So even a big company like HubSpot would turn to you to say, help us get our, whatever kind of marketing manager, leader, people out there on podcasts, talking to the audience to explain what we do.
Exactly. Because people get content in different ways. And I think that's one of the amazing things today. I've written a lot of blogs in my life, but every one of them was like a homework assignment. To me, talking is the easy part. And today we can produce the content in the way that's easiest for us and then repurpose it in the way that's easiest for our customers. So we could take this podcast interview, put some B-roll footage over it, and now it's a video. We could transcribe it and make some blogs out of it. Now it's a blog. So really, it makes it easier for people. And at the end of the day, marketing is starting a conversation with someone that could be an ideal customer. And there's just lots of different ways to do that: print, visual, or audio.
Cool. Now, you mentioned the three verticals. So it was business and then faith and Christianity. And what was the third one?
Correct.
What was the third one?
And the third one is health, nutrition, and wellness.
Okay. I want to probably spend most of the time on the business, but I'm just curious, like faith and Christianity, what sort of professionals would be hiring you to try to get on podcasts, like people who have like written books on that stuff or on those topics, or who are like,
So some of it could be a book tour that it has more of a spiritual bent to it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's even a consultant, right? There's the consultant, and they've got a faith bent or service bent to their business. Well, you can go on all the business shows, or you can go on other shows where it may stand out a little bit more. And I'll give you an example of, there was a life and business coach we worked with very early on. And he went on a podcast that was called 40 Plus Fitness, a great podcast. Well, what does a business coach have to do on a fitness podcast? Well, he got on there and he talked about the need for work-life balance, and that you have to be healthy all the way around. And I loved one of the points he made. He said, it does you no good if you make your first million by 30, if you make your first widow by 40. There's got to be some balance in there. And, that stood out so much more on that podcast than it would have just on a business podcast. And it converted very well for him too. So we're always creatively looking at where people are. Where's your ideal audience? Where could we put you in front of that you would stand out even more?
Cool. Now, in terms of figuring out the right podcast for people to target, I want to kind of approach that from two angles. One, I'm curious to hear what your firm does. Also curious to get your perspective for someone who's going to try to do it themselves, some guidance, right? So let's start with what your firm does. So have you kind of mapped out the universe of podcasts and by topic and so forth? How do you screen through all the podcasts out there to figure out ones that would be good matches for your clients?
Yeah. And so early on, it was a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and we've tried to get more and more toward the science side. Our algorithm looks at four things, and all of them are important for results from a podcast interview. The first one that everybody goes to is the podcast itself. What is their focus? What kind of listeners do they have? How many episodes do they have? How many ratings and reviews? One of the sad things about podcasts is most podcasts that die within the first 10 episodes. So it does you no good to be on, episode 7 when they stop paying the hosting bill at episode 8.
Mm-hmm.
No one will ever hear you. The other thing that a lot of times people will think is that bigger is better, but better is better. There's more fish in the ocean than there are in a barrel. But man, if you can find a small barrel of fish, go there every time. So the podcast is the first thing we look at. The second thing is the website. So every podcast interview you go on is going to should have show notes, and they'll link back to you. And that's a strong signal to the search engines that says, hey, this is a good website. We've got some clients that work with us just for the SEO value. And, if you ask them, hey, do you want to be on the Joe Rogan podcast, or do you want to be on a podcast from Harvard University with their undergraduate school? Well, one of them gets 500,000 listeners. The other one might get 500 listeners. But they'll go to the Harvard one because now they've got a link from their website from harvard.edu, and that's pure gold.
Mm.
The third thing we look at is the reach. So are they promoting it on social media? Are they promoting it to their email list? I can think of one podcast. It's a great podcast. He probably gets about 10,000 downloads per episode, but I know this gentleman has an email list of about 30,000. And every week he promotes his podcast to the email list and who the guest is. So there are some people that don't listen to podcasts, but still get promoted through that email. And then the fourth thing we look at is experience with previous guests. So we see what works, what doesn't. There's some shows that have always converted well for our clients, and then there's other ones that don't. You don't get visions of that or visibility to that. I can tell you that if somebody's got like the same 5 to 6 questions they ask every guest, it's going to be a harder one to convert from. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that what we do here, it's not magic, it's not art. We both come from the nuclear power field there, and it was a system. And it was a system that could be taught. It could be reproduced. You didn't need superheroes to do it. You just need highly motivated people that would work the system. And so, I've freely share how we do it. I've written a book, and I give more of those books away than ever. And the thing is you can do it yourself. But early on, I wrote the book, and I actually did a course, and I never took it out of beta. Because what the people told me is that, you've given me a cookbook, you've given me the videos. I don't want to learn how to do all this. I don't want to make it myself. I want to be the guest. I want you to do the rest. And so that's what we do. Our zone of genius is podcast interview marketing, and it's all that we do. But it's something that you can definitely do on your own. It's just a question of what's the best use of your time. Is it performing, or is it doing everything else around that?
Yeah. Now, so let me just make sure I captured the 4 points. So, right, number one, there was the website. Number
Correct.
2, the kind of the reach that they have and experience with previous guests. Okay, so I got my notes. In terms of the podcast itself, you're looking at how many episodes. So, if you don't want one that's like just petered out and only had 7 or 8 shows and then it dies. It's one that they show that like some longevity. Do you look what data sources exist on how many, how quote unquote big the show is? How do you even know that? Like, there's not really Nielsen ratings. So how do you know how many downloads a show is getting?
Downloads is one of the things that's missing in podcasting right now. The only people that know the actual number of downloads is the podcast hosts themselves and the hosting company. And by terms of service, the hosting company can't share those. And some people say, well, that's awful. Well, it is and it isn't, because the numbers at certain times can be misleading. I remember talking to a client, and they said, well, last week I was on a radio show and 4 million people heard me. And I'm like, well, what was the station? And we started talking about it. And what it was is it had the potential reach of 4 million people. So that signal reached 4 million people in the geographical area. And I'm like, well, I don't think all 4 million people were listening to that station at that time. And if somebody wanted to listen to it and they missed it, it's gone forever. So podcast interviews or podcasts are evergreen. So even though we're recording this now, there's somebody in 2022 that's listening to this for the first time. So from that perspective, if the Chicago radio station can have the possibility of reaching 6 million people, well, by that same calculation, you could say this podcast interview has the potential to reach billions of people over time. Now, that's a gross exaggeration. Not 1/3 of the world is going to listen to it. But I also look at it and say, if you were to have an opportunity to speak in front of 10 people, 10 ideal customers, would you cancel what you're doing today and drive across town? Or if there was 100, would you drive across state to talk to them? Or, if I had the opportunity to talk to 1,000 ideal customers, I'd jump on a plane. And you think about it, with podcast interviews here, you can do it from home. And what might consider a small audience or a big audience for a physical event is actually a small podcast audience. One of our clients that we work with, Pete Vargas, he spoke at the Miami Dolphins Stadium earlier this year in front of about 30,000 people. And I remember talking to him the night before, and he was nervous, of course. And I told him, don't worry about it. You've spoken to more people than this on a podcast interview. And he said, yeah, but they weren't all looking back at me.
Well, a good point. I also just want to give a shout out to Hello 2022. Looking forward to seeing who's president. So you're looking at the website of it as well. So it sounds like you have kind of looked at a bunch of websites and classified them across these 4 dimensions to figure out like what would the good ones be for a particular guest. Let's talk for people who want to try doing this at home. What are the tips on how to reach out to the podcast host to try to get on the show, to kind of pitch yourself? Let's talk about that. How do you guys do it? And then, individuals listening can figure out, what they would want to do.
Sure. So think about your podcast host. Who do you want to have on your podcast? I guarantee it's 3 types of people: your friends, friends of friends, and people you want to be your friends. Nowhere on there does it say cold pitches or slimy pitches. So think about now when you're pitching a host, how to do that. So now we've got the relationships with the podcasters. We've got relationships with over 3,500 podcasters. And, with the bigger our team gets, the better the relationships we have with the podcasters, because everybody's, list and the Rolodex is finite, and we're able to scale that up. But if you're an individual doing that, think about how can you become a friend. So it's not a cold pitch. I have to laugh, Will, because I get pitched about twice a day to be on my podcast, and everyone starts the same way. Dear Tom, we love your podcast and would love to be a guest. The only problem with that is I don't have a podcast. And, if you're going to lie to me, tell me I look young or pretty. Don't tell me you love my podcast. The better way to do it is to listen to the interview, listen to the podcast, spend some time, invest in it, and say, is this really a good podcast for me? Leave a rating and review. We are all vain. Every podcaster, I don't care who they are, looks at the ratings and reviews. If you leave a rating and review, they'll know who you are, at least in the short term, right? Take the content. If they put something out on LinkedIn, comment about it, share about it. If it's on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, engage with them a little bit. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, jab, 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 right hook. Well, I look at it as give, 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 ask. So, give some love, give them a rating and review, give them some more love, share their content, give them a reason to ask you to be on the podcast. So when you reach out, it could be through email, it could be through social media. Your whole idea there is to serve. So don't start with, Will, I've got a new book and I want to use your audience to sell my book. No, start out with, Will, I've listened to the podcast. I really liked it. I listened to this episode and this was really good. It caused me to do this in my life. I shared it with here and some friends really enjoyed that. And I think they're going to listen to the podcast. Give. And then say, I think I could bring value to your audience by sharing this knowledge, and I'd like to do this. If you do that, people will be asking you to be on a podcast. And the other thing about it too is that podcasters know podcasters, right? I was just at Podcast Movement Convention last week. 3,500 podcasters down in Orlando. It's really, really grown. And podcasters know podcasters. So if you do a good job on an interview, at the end, you just say, do you know of any other podcasts or any other places that I could share this to bring value? If they tell two friends and so on and do the introductions, boy, your dance card can get filled there really quickly.
Yeah, what you say about kind of giving first really resonates. If you like someone's podcast, kind of posting on LinkedIn about it and tagging the podcaster, do that a few times. Unless they're kind of, running like Tim Ferriss or something, if they're just an ordinary human podcaster, they're probably going to, notice that and thank you. And if you do it 2 or 3 times, for instance, like, oh, who's this person who's listening to my podcast? Because not a lot of people do that. So, okay, that's cool. So that I can understand that you really want to target it and focus it. So you don't go out to 100 podcasters and ask, but really target 3 or 4 and start working to build relationships. What about afterwards? So let's say after you've been on the show, to really maximize the impact of it, how do you help your clients like either create little micro content or, communicate that on social media or email their followers, Twitter, LinkedIn, that, hey, I was just on the show and we talked about, this topic with so-and-so and it was great. Here's the link to it. How do you recommend people kind of maximize the impact of being on a show?
Sure. And let me pull back the curtain on here and I'll show you exactly how it's done. So the best practice that we have found from all the testing is to send people to a dedicated welcome page. So don't say, just go to interviewvalet.com and everything will be there. Nor do you send them to, here's my Twitter, here's my LinkedIn, here's my Facebook. It will just confuse them. So the best practice is always to say one place. We call it a welcome page, a dedicated page. So if you want to see an example of it, I'll make one at interviewvalet.com/unleashed. So if you're listening now, if you're listening in 2022, it doesn't matter. It will still be the same thing there. So when you get there, you think about it. If you've heard somebody on a podcast interview, you've never seen them and you've never seen their website. So that traffic tends to bounce really bad. So what works best, and if you go to that page, the first thing you're going to see is Will's picture. You're going to see the artwork for Unleashed, right? Because those are trust seals. Then you know that you got to the right place. Then there'll be some text. There'll be my picture. Some people will come back just to figure out, what's this person look like? And then there'll be the offers down below. And this is one way that you can attribute the traffic so you know what podcasts are working, which ones aren't converting, so that you can go on more of that type. We worked with a client that was a fractional CFO, a CPA. And after about 6 months, we were able to tell him, you do really well on dental podcasts. And he loved dentists. And because he was converting so well for about the next 6 months, all we put him on were dental podcasts, smaller bucket of fish, but man, he got clients from it every time. So going back to that welcome page, then put 3 ways for people to say yes. Most digital marketers will tell you one call to action. I don't disagree with them. But podcast interviews, you have to meet people where they are. So give them a small yes, a medium yes, and a heck yes. So like a small yes, there's a checklist we use for every one of our interviews. Remember in the military, they said checklists are written in blood. Make sure it's somebody else's blood. So there's a checklist that we give away. Now that one, it's a freebie, right? It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't cost a lot of time. So that's a small yes. Gets the people to go back there. The medium yes could be something that takes a little bit more time, an investment of time. Maybe it's a video, maybe it's an ebook. The one I always use is a copy of my book. So if you want a copy of Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy, you can just go there and download it. The final yes, that heck yes, is if somebody hears you on a podcast interview and says, man, I want to engage with them. I want to work with them. Well, don't slow them down in a funnel. Give them a chance to engage. So for us, it's always, hey, if you want to jump on a discovery call, see how this works for you, we'll have that there too. So you always send them to a dedicated welcome page and then give them 3 ways to say yes: a small yes, a medium yes, and a heck yes. That's the best way to really move people from being passive listeners to active visitors to engaged leads.
Okay, this is fascinating. So for your clients who are being on someone else's podcast, you will help them not just kind of give a link like, hey, I was on this podcast, here's a link to it, right? But they'll actually create on their own website a page that's like, I was on, podcast XYZ, and, here's what, so they will like post a page, a dedicated page on it about that. And, here's a link to go listen to that podcast, but here's like what we talked about. Here's a picture of the host. So they'll actually kind of create some of their own content to help, get the full benefit of being on that show.
Correct. And for our clients, we actually build that page for them on their website. And then we'll also, work with them on how can they use that content to the best of the ability. So, definitely promote it on social media. Why wouldn't you? Right? They used to have on all the websites, and everybody would tell each other, "Hey, I was just on the local television." Well, why wouldn't you tell everybody I was just on this podcast? Share it with them. The other thing that we're working with a lot of clients on now is repurposing the content. There's probably a month's worth of content out of every podcast interview. Like I said before, you can take some B-roll footage and make a quick little video that you can put up there. You could probably get 5 or 6 different blog posts out of every podcast interview just by transcribing it and having somebody clean it up. You can get tweets, you get memes, you can even, they call them audiograms if you ever see it on Facebook or Instagram, where somebody's talking and maybe you'll see the WAV file so you can tell they're talking. You can do those. And so from that standpoint, we've got a lot of clients now as we come into the end of the year. Their goal is to do, a dozen interviews in fourth quarter so that they're going to take that content and use it for their content for the next year. Each month focusing on a different podcast interview and different things there. So there's so many ways that you can use it. It's really just limited by your imagination and the team you're working with.
Yeah. And do you help your clients then create all that other versions of content, turn the discussion into a blog post or tweets or LinkedIn posts, et cetera?
Yeah, we've got some partners that we work with where that is their zone of genius. So there's always, what problem do you solve for your clients and what problem do you create for your clients? So the problem that we solved for our clients was the obscurity, right? How do we get on podcast interviews? How do we get these people from being a passive listener to an active visitor and engaged lead? But the problem we created for them, they're like, well, I've got this gold, this content. How can I use it better? So that's where we're really working with them now and some key partners to make that so that they can get so much more out of the interview. Our goal is always to get maximum return on investment for our clients, both in their money and their time. And because, for most people, their time is their most precious resource. And if you're running a startup company, if you're a coach, a consultant, a brand, if you can use 45 minutes of a podcast interview and get a month's worth of content out of it, that makes the podcast interview even more valuable.
Yeah, some people are great at sitting down and just writing a blog post, but for maybe a lot of people, it's easier to just have a conversation, and then coming out of that, a lot of good ideas come out of that can be turned into blog posts by someone else, to helping them out, using their ideas. What have you found to be kind of the most high impact collateral from? Do you find it's like to drive traffic to that welcome page? Is it like a tweets? Is it video content that you create out of it? Is it like it's just graphic still image with maybe a quote on it? What have you found works really well?
To me, it's all of the above. And really, the welcome page is where they're coming to after they've heard the interview. So really, it's the work or the The flow is to take them, drive them to the interview, and then after the interview, they come to get those the offers and to engage with you. One of the things that I've seen is very, very powerful with this is to use the podcast interview as a proof source. So you've got somebody that comes to you and says, I'd like to engage with you. I saw a Facebook post of you. A friend told me about you, but I need a little bit more information. Well, I could jump on a call with them for 45 minutes and try to explain all of this. Or we could have somebody on the team just say, we did an interview on the Unleashed podcast, and Tom talked with Will, and here's the link for it. You may want to check that one out. And especially if you find the right podcast for the right audience, it can be gold. So now the customer or the prospect is starting to educate themselves. And when you have a sales call with someone that has heard you on a podcast interview, it's very, very strange. It tends to close really quickly because they know so much more about you than you know about them. So with it, that tends to be, it's more of a qualification call, right? Are they a good customer? Is it somebody that we can help? Most of the time, they're pretty much pre-sold. I always say there's three types of people that hear me on a podcast interview. The first one says, Tom is an idiot. I don't disagree with them, but all I can tell you is if they didn't like me from the podcast interview, if they didn't like what our company's doing, what we stand for, what our vision, what our mission is, then they're not going to be a good client. So that's fine. God bless them, no judgment. They can go on their way. The second type of person is the one that goes, that's interesting, but it's not something I need right now. Same thing. At the end of the day, we don't want more leads, right? We want more customers. The third type of person is the one that hears you on a podcast interview, and they're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. They work with people like me. They get results. These are the type of people that I want to work with. And those are the ones that come ready to engage. And those are the ones that will close faster, be more profitable, be better customers. Because today, I don't think any of us need more customers. I think we need better customers. As we've got, billion people out there that we could serve, you can't serve all billion. So let's just find those, 1,000 true fans or however you want to call it and work with them.
Yeah. And for that third group out there who are listening to this show right now, could you, I don't know if it's, kind of keep it confidential or if you just, you're just totally open about, could you describe your fee structure? And for someone who says maybe I should call Tom and get, get his help. What's your pricing?
Yeah, today there is nothing that is secret or confidential or anything like that. Everything is on the internet someplace. So I openly share this and put it out there. I've never liked the way that PR agencies, their business model, the retainer of, hey, give us $10,000 a month and we'll try really, really hard. I believe that there has to be deliverables along with the price on that. So we base everything off of the podcast interview. So we put together campaigns or packages. And so that includes everything. It includes, the welcome pages that we talked about. It includes the equipment, so you sound great, the training, all the preparation. You're assigned an account manager that is your single point of contact. So for all of that, our packages start at about $4,500 for 12 interviews, and then they ramp up from there. But that includes all the training, the equipment, all the rest of that. So really, it's more than just a podcast interview. It's the complete podcast interview marketing system.
Cool. And we will certainly include it in the show notes, but you want to mention it again, the best link for people to go to?
Sure. And just go to interviewvalet.com/unleashed. And there you'll see everything Will and I talked about. All my contact information will be there. So if you want to follow me on social media or email me, it'll all be there. And then we'll also have that checklist, the checklist for what to do when you're on a podcast interview. I'll put a free download of the book, Podcast Guest Profits, How to Build Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. And then I'll also put my calendar link in there. So If you want to talk about how you could use podcast interview marketing to grow your business, love to have a discovery call with me or somebody on our team to see how we could make that happen.
Now, one thing that you did, which I thought was pretty slick in a good way, I thought was pretty neat, was it was some kind of drip marketing campaign. Like, I don't know if I'm curious how you did it, like HubSpot or MailChimp or whatever, reminding me about our upcoming conversation today. So even though I reached out to you because I found you on LinkedIn and thought what you're doing was kind of interesting, you scheduled it with my Calendly link. But then once it was on our calendars, you sent me like several reminders. Like it was like 2 weeks out, 1 week out, 3 days out, yesterday, of preparing for our Interview Valet interview. And it had some content in there. Here's some questions that you might want to ask. Here's some information about me, about Tom. Tell me a little bit about, how practically you do that, and also, how to make that kind of tool effective. Because I think it's widely applicable beyond just a podcast interview. You could use it for all sorts of things. Hey, we have our upcoming kickoff meeting in 2 weeks and 1 week, or we have an upcoming, workshop, et cetera. So tell me a little bit about just the tool that you use to do that.
Well, and I always look at tools are amplifiers of brilliance or ignorance, right? So I can go through the tool, but before I do, I think of a buddy of mine, Dan Miller, had a tree that was knocked down, and an artist came in with a chainsaw and carved a beautiful eagle in it. That same year, I just about cut my leg off with the chainsaw cutting wood. So tools are just amplifiers of your brilliance or your ignorance. And the real credit on this goes to our team. They've got great hearts. One of our values is that, relationships are the ultimate currency, and that, in this digital age of automation, it's the personal touch that makes the difference. So we've got systems where, we do email reminders, but we make them as personal as possible so that people don't feel like it's like, dear ma'am or sir. There's always personalization in it. And then there's also value in it. Nobody wants another email. I don't want to sign up for your newsletter, right? I don't want another newsletter. But if there's great information in there, I'll sign up for it. So each one of those emails, and it probably came from Stephanie. Stephanie's my account manager. I work the system, and I'm a customer just like all of our customers are. So she reached out to you and said, here's the one sheet for Tom. Here's his headshot. Here's all his social media links. Here's his bio. Here's different things he can talk about. They may have sent you a book or sent you a copy of the book, but all of those things that each one of those emails had value into it, because, we're always either building up trust or we're destroying trust. So, if you get spam emails, it just destroys the trust. One of the things that I'm very proud of is our company as a whole, 45% of the pitches we make are turn into actual interviews. And people are blown away by that in the industry, because the industry, it's, spray and pray. I send out 100 pitches and I get one back, yes. They don't realize the harm they're doing with that. If we're going to send an email, it's because we believe that this is a great connection. And if somebody says no, that's fine. But let's find out why they said no, because next time we want to make sure that we give them an even better introduction with that. So it's a little bit of technology, and the one that you probably got it through was probably HubSpot, but it's also the personalization in there.
Yeah. It's a really useful idea, I think, not just for being on a podcast interview, but any kind of upcoming meeting that you might have where you want to, one, just keep reminding people that you have an upcoming meeting, and give them some additional useful information to prepare for it. Maybe it's a initial client discussion or a workshop where you're inviting a bunch of people to it. So it's a nice idea. You talked a little bit about training your guests. Talk to me about that a little bit, about some of the ways that you help prepare people to be successful on a podcast.
So podcasts are different than other medium. And we've learned that the best podcasts are the ones that are a conversation. Go off beyond your talking points and really share stories. Content is king, but context is God. So depending on what the audience is, you can focus on different aspects of it. We've worked with some clients that are on television all the time. I can think of one that's a news contributor on cybersecurity. And we really had to work with him because he was used to a 3-minute segment. And of that 3 minutes, the host would probably talk at least a minute of it. So when you asked him a question, Morgan would give you a soundbite and it'd be 30 seconds or 45 seconds. We're like, no, this is more long form content. You've got to get longer answers with this. And he really loved it because, as he pointed out, he'd be on national news. He's on probably 3 or 4 times a night, depending what the topics are, or 3 or 4 times a week, depending what the topics are that week. But he would say it's an hour drive in there. They send the car for him. Then it's an hour in the green room getting ready, 3 or 4 minutes on television, and another hour back home. And he's like, that's if you don't get bumped. So he said for a 4-hour investment, he'd get maybe 3 minutes of time. Where he says with a podcast, he can do it from home and he gets to tell deeper stories and get more insight, for 30 or 45 minutes. So one of the things we do with all of our clients is, we'll listen to some of the early interviews and give them ideas for that. Before any client gets pitched by us, we've got a kickoff phase that we do, the training. It takes about 7 to 10 days, and we're doing a lot of work on our part to get everything ready. But the practice interview is always with me. And I love it because I get to talk with the clients, get any feedback, but also just to make sure that they're ready to go, that they're confident, and that I know that when they meet that host and are introduced to the audience, that everything's going to go great.
Yeah, okay, that's fantastic. I've certainly, you've seen, now we're about 200 episodes, seen quite a range of guests. Some are awesome and they totally, tell stories. I think you're right. You want to talk longer than 30 seconds. You also don't want to talk for like 15 minutes. We should be a conversation and not just a 15-minute monologue. And, being able to tell stories but just make it conversational. Any other tips for preparing for interviews? I guess maybe have some stories ready that you can take some questions and maybe turn it back to that story if there's a key point you want to get across. Not in an annoying way, but having some anecdotes, perhaps.
I think that when our initial sales conversations, as you asked this, I was just thinking on the fly. I think their first interview is probably in the initial sales conversation and the initial discovery. If you can't get a word in edgewise with somebody on a 30-minute call, they're probably not going to be a good podcast guest because it's like you said, they're the ones that say, Tom, tell me about yourself. And 45 minutes later, they're still going.
Yeah.
But I think it's really that idea of, are you interested in being interesting? Are you curious? Do you want to have a conversation? I think I said it before that podcasts are an awful place for an infomercial, but they're a great place for people to get to know, like, and trust you. Rand Fishkin from a company called Moz, best tweet ever. I've got this, I share it in so many presentations, but he said, the best way to sell something today is not to sell anything, but to earn the respect, awareness, and trust of those who might buy. So I always think coming at it from that heart and to have stories, it's if you're going to refer to a graph or a chart or percentages, no one's ever going to remember that. This is not the medium for that. If I told you a story, and it was that we had this client, Craig Cody, fractional CFO, an accountant, great guy. He's like no other accountant that you've ever met. He was a retired New York City detective, and he reported that after his first 12 months, he grew 600%, and after his first 24 months, he grew 1,200%. Now, it's a neat story there. What you will remember is there was an accountant. He used to be a New York City cop, and it worked really well for him. No one will remember the numbers. So you just got to remember that too, that don't just start doing facts and figures, and especially if they're out of context, because no one will remember them. The other thing to think of is that the studies have shown that it's 70% of the people that listen to podcasts listen to them sped up. So if you're putting out numbers like that, if they're hard to follow at normal speed, if somebody's got them sped up and they're multitasking, they're running, they're working out, they're doing the dishes, their chances of remembering those are slim to none.
Wait a minute. I just want to check this. I had no idea. So when you say sped up, you mean they're listening to them at 1.25 speed or something?
Correct.
No kidding. So, I had no idea.
I typically listen at 2x speed.
Whoa.
I joke that I listen to 2x speed while I run at half x speed. But yeah, so with that, a lot of people, are audible listeners. They're used to that. And for me, I've trained myself to do that. And to me, my mind doesn't wander then. And also I can get twice the content in. There was a book, and I can't think of the gentleman's name now, but he lost his sight in college, and he went on to finish law school blind, and he actually clerked for Judge Sandra Day O'Connor, and he was totally blind. And in his book, he puts out there that he listens at 7x speed, and he's just used to it. And you think about it, it's like, wow. That is amazing, but some people can speed read, and most people can train themselves to speed it up.
Wow. Okay, I had no idea. All right, so 70% of listeners are listening to us at 1.25 or faster. Okay, I'll make sure I don't speak a lot faster. Otherwise, it'd be like 1.75. That is amazing. So I think what you're doing is so cool, and I think we already gave the links. We'll include all of that in our show notes, and I'm definitely interested to check out your welcome page myself. I can't wait to see it. I haven't had a guest do that before, so I think it's a really, really smart idea. Tom, thank you for being on the show. This was fascinating.
Well, it was great to talk with you, and all I could say to everybody is what's ordinary to you is amazing to others, and you can share that with people that could be your ideal customer. I always think back of when I was in the Navy. I was a nuke on an aircraft carrier, and the first couple of days you'd go up there, you'd watch the planes take off, and then after a while you're like, I'm not climbing all the way up there. It's too far of a walk. And people would always go, well, did you watch that? No, it became ordinary. So I think we all undervalue what we can offer the world and overvalue what other people do. What's ordinary to you is amazing to other people. And today there's been no easier way to do that. You can do it, through videos, through blogging, being a podcast host, being a podcast guest. All I would encourage you is, share what you know. And if we can help you do that to make the world a better place, we would love to connect with you. Just go back there to interviewvalet.com/unleashed.
Tom, that is a great, great parting message. I totally agree. Share what you know, contribute to the conversation. Tom, hey, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Will.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.